Hello, my name is Jeff Rolka. This is the new format that I'm trying out right now to make it a little bit more possible for me to go in depth on questions that come in. So these questions can come in via Twitter, they can come in via email. Sometimes people send emails to me, or also just in the comments. And I'm a day late on this one. I got really caught up in a bunch of video production this weekend, and so I am late. I do apologize for that. If you were looking for your answers, they are a day late. But better a little late than never at all. So I'm going to dive right in. Thank you if you've chosen to subscribe. I think I put a bunch of ways that you can support the channel in the description. If not, I'll do so afterwards. And many of them are free, so even if you just would consider subscribing or sharing, that would be awesome. This is just a small portion of what I do here on YouTube. Okay. I'm interested to know, so let me go through all the questions here first. I'm interested to know what is the difference between vowel modifications and diphthongs. Is it that the diphthong combines two vowels, whereas the modified vowel contains an acute sound? Next question. What is the difference between high and falsetto? Now, this next question, there's kind of a few parts to this one. Someone says, you sing louder when she sings along. She may be correct. I have my doubts. I tend to think that just joining me on the chorus is when I would increase in intensity anyway. However, if she joins me, I do feel that the result is better, so maybe I relax a little bit and enjoy it more. Next up, lately I've been wondering about why I could sing an aria with more power than the contemporary Christian music I now sing. Could the difference be due to an inherent difference between the genres? Pardon me. For example, I find myself making a very conscious effort to enunciate differently when I sing contemporary songs. I'm now striving to position sound more forward, sing in lower keys, sing with less vowel modifications, sing with vibrato. Are any or all of these actions causing my contemporary vocal style to be underpowered? Can I correct this? Should I? Or should I simply rely on microphones to amplify my voice? Next up, I am feeling caged. Maybe I just need to be patient with other aspects of my voice to develop. Nonetheless, I have less power and agility when in a lower tessitura. I sing to vocal tracks during ministry time after church. Is this most likely an area in which I need to develop, or just the way it will be for any high female voice who chooses to sing contemporary style tunes? Let's see here. Keyword search term for on-stage training workshops to develop comfort with monitors and loud bands. So like how to search for this sort of stuff if there are workshops out there and things like that. And finally, if baritones can masquerade, I like this question. Not that I don't like the other questions, but I talk about this rather frequently, so yeah, it's kind of fun. If baritones can masquerade as tenors, why cannot I, or why should I not, masquerade as a contralto? So if you're a soprano, why could you not masquerade as an alto or a contralto? So let's go back around. Those are the questions I'm going to talk about here. Okay, first up, what's the difference between vowel modifications and diphthongs? A diphthong, the actual technical definition of a diphthong is two vowels that are combined to create a different sound. So if you take the A vowel and the E vowel, A, E, I forgot my diphthongs now. When you combine the two different vowels, you get a different one. So, with the example I was thinking of, it's right there at the top of my head. I'm thinking of the word chaos, A, that's your A vowel. But that also has a certain E sound to it, that Y sound. And so when you, that's a diphthong. And sometimes we get slightly modified vowels when we're ascending towards the secondo passaggio. So they have a bit of a diphthong quality to them, but they're not necessarily used in the same way. Sometimes in order to get a specific vowel, you have to combine the different vowels to get it. Other times, when we're modifying a vowel in the zona de passaggio, we are in fact changing the vowel that we're singing. So like E. This will lean towards as I get higher into my zona de passaggio. I'll overdo it a little bit here. You can hear I really overdid it and I went a little flat on the top there too. So in a way, vowel modifications kind of are diphthongs, but we don't really talk about them that way because we're talking about it in the context of ascending into the zona de passaggio in order to keep airflow and vocal fold engagement working properly. If we just stayed on the thyroarytenoid dominant sound, the kind of vowel formation we would have there in our normal out of the zona de passaggio range, we would quickly start to get into problems in the zona de passaggio, either going out of tune or straining a little bit to try to maintain that phonation. I hope that helps. I should have thought through this a little bit more carefully and gotten my textbook out to just give you some specific examples. But there you have it. What is the difference between high and falsetto? Falsetto has come to be thought of as being high notes. But really what you're talking about is a general description of notes versus a range of the voice. Falsetto, however, also has a certain configuration of the vocal fold which is worth considering. So, for example, if I'm here, that's my transition from chest voice to head voice and back. Now, my falsetto range is just a little bit further up that key area is there. And the thing that happens when I make the transition to falsetto is that the vocal fold, which is here being used in an adducted format, so it's staying closed. When I get to falsetto, there's a small amount of separation or abduction that occurs in the vocal fold and dampening, and then the remaining part continues to vibrate. It's that change from adduction, where the vocal fold is closed along its longitudinal lines, to a slight amount of abduction, that is also part of what signifies being in the falsetto range of our voices. So we can still have a falsetto tone production without being in the falsetto range of our voice. Here again is head voice. Here is, instead of singing to head voice, this is what happens if I use a falsetto sound, falsetto tone production, as I'm fond of saying. You can hear me going from chest voice to the falsetto tone production and back. The vocal fold separates. It gets a little bit airy and a little bit less in volume. I lose a lot of air when I do that. And then it abducts when I come back down again. Those terms like head voice, falsetto, are unfortunately used synonymously a lot in the various schools of vocal pedagogy that you can find. And this has created an unfortunate and, I think, unnecessary amount of confusion in how the vocal apparatus works. But there you have it. You can certainly find arguments to be made on both sides of that. There are some who would suggest, I'm thinking of the books that I've read, that the word falsetto should only be used in its antiquated definition, which is largely not even talked about these days. I'm not even going to mention it here because I feel funny about perpetuating that as yet another way of using that term. And there are those who would insist that head voice and falsetto are synonymous. And all of these different pedagogical approaches have their reasons and rationale behind them. I think that it's important, for me, the thing that was important about understanding the differences between thyroarytenoid dominant singing, chest voice, cricothyroid dominant singing, head voice, and falsetto, the thing that was really important for me was to understand the differences in how the vocal fold is functioning so that I could more reliably use my voice efficiently and get the results that I wanted. Bottom line, pardon me, if in your singing you're getting good results, carry on. That's the most important thing. If you're not, then maybe consider looking at some of the videos on my channel, which definitively approach the notion of falsetto as a range above the head voice range. Do some reading. Richard Miller, I'm a big advocate of Richard Miller's books. Shirley Emmons has some very, very good information that's all free online. Great places to check things out. Okay, now, we've got a lot of other questions coming up here. From the bottom to the top, why can baritones masquerade as tenors? Because they develop really, really good smooth transitions through the secondo passaggio and perhaps even further into the falsetto range of their voices. Speaking about falsetto in the way that I talk about it, which is an extension above the head voice, above cricothyroid dominant singing. But higher voices, such as sopranos or tenors, cannot masquerade in the opposite direction, because the lower boundary in terms of consistent tone production is harder in terms of, and I don't mean harder as in more difficult, I mean harder as in a firmer boundary, a more concrete boundary, if you will, than the upper boundary. So let me unpack that for a second. For me to go much lower than this, I very quickly start to get a very different sound in my voice. And that isn't necessarily going to be useful in repertoire. Now, it might not matter if you're singing, a pop tune or something like that, but my voice will not ever have the kind of connection and the kind of resonance that a baritone range would, getting down into where the baritones are comfortable singing. I can certainly sing some of those notes, but there is definitively a change in tone from the most comfortable range of my voice, or the more, shall we say, normal range of my operating tessitura. It's much more likely that a baritone who really works on their transition technique across the secondo passaggio, that's commonly referred to as the break, across the secondo passaggio, and perhaps even into their falsetto range, will be able to mimic the tonal qualities of the tenor voice. That's not to say that every baritone can do that. I'm thinking of one specific individual one specific teacher of mine from some time ago, who used to say that he would masquerade as a tenor all the time. He was a baritone vocalist. So that's that is the rationale behind that. Keyword search terms for onstage training workshops to develop comfort with monitors and loud bands and more stage presence. The first thing that comes to my mind here in Northern California is a company called Bandworks, and what they do is they put together ensembles that then get you into that situation where you're getting with a band and everyone's playing their instruments, and it can be quite loud, and there's monitors involved in PA systems and all the trappings of those kinds of scenarios. That might or might not be the best thing for one. Oftentimes, I am not particularly aware of any specific training workshops that are like this, and maybe it's something that I should consider doing. But Bandworks is a company that would put you into that environment and give you an opportunity from a week-to-week basis to work within it and get accustomed to it. I don't necessarily. This is an interesting question because I think there are a number of ways to think about it, and I am not one to recreate the worst case scenario to try to rise above it. I generally feel like it's more efficacious to practice, so that we practice our best practices so that our best performances become a matter of habit, that our vocal technique, our engagement, airflow, vowel alignment, all that kind of stuff becomes a point of habitual response. That's the way that we sing these things rather than something we have to really consciously focus on. So that when we are in these situations where it's really loud and it can be uncomfortable, maybe we can't hear ourselves very well, we rely on those habits, that mode of doing things. Less power and agility in a lower tessitura. I sing to vocal tracks during a ministry time after church. This is most likely an area in which I need to develop, just the way it will be for any high female voice who chooses to sing contemporary style tunes. Yes, now the remaining questions all sort of intertwine in various ways. One, this is one of those areas that is where female classical vocal technique diverges from male vocal technique quite distinctly, which is that the cricothyroid dominant singing voice or head voice can oftentimes be brought much lower below the secondo passaggio than you would typically do for a male vocalist. That has the effect of allowing the thyroarytenoid dominant singing voice to go somewhat or entirely undeveloped if you've not been practicing contemporary popular genres. So, for example, in the male tenor, the secondo passaggio typically is around F sharp above C, middle C sharp, F above middle C, F sharp above middle C sharp. There's a perfect fourth between the secondo passaggio, F sharp, and the primo passaggio, C sharp, right above, right there at middle C, C sharp 4. Perfect fourth. It is not uncommon for the secondo passaggio of a soprano, which could be anywhere from, typically it's going to be around G5, F sharp 5 in that area, that the primo passaggio might not be really registered until almost an octave lower, in that area of A flat 4, A4, somewhere in that general area, nearly an octave of space. As such, because the head voice, because the cricothyroid dominant singing voice has been brought so low, the transition into thyroarytenoid dominant singing can be rather challenging and somewhat undeveloped. The delineations of the female classical singing voice get broken down a little bit more distinctly. There's a middle voice that's talked about that happens between the primo passaggio and the secondo passaggio, and there's also a demarcation which is more similar to the primo passaggio for the male vocalist, that is about a perfect fourth below the secondo passaggio in this training, where you start to access that more cricothyroid dominant singing voice. Bottom line here is that if you have not practiced that, then there is no reason to suspect that you would have the same kind of agility or flexibility. That is not to suggest you won't develop it, but it's a different balance of airflow and vocal fold engagement that needs to be practiced. Moving back a little bit into the second question, it's quite likely that in popular genres, it's very, very easy to over-enunciate the consonants, particularly if there is a high onus on us, if we're like leading worship or something like that, or you really, really want the lyrics of what you are singing to be understood. It's very, very easy to over-enunciate the consonants, and that can really break up the airflow through the melody to our detriment. Being conscious of this and trying to attenuate the response of the consonants while still remaining intelligible is a practice that becomes habitual over time, but it's something that I think that bears consideration just all the time, really. It does, the flexibility that we have with the amount of enunciation also changes as we ascend into the zona di passaggio and certainly above the secondo passaggio. Between a very comfortable thyroarytenoid dominant singing voice versus a head voice. In the head voice, in order to maintain that kind of tessitura, maintain good in-tune singing there, downplaying the consonants in order to maintain good airflow and maintain the vocal lines will absolutely help to keep the vocal fold deducted and keep things working properly there. A lot of the questions here about placing the sound more forward or singing with less vowel modifications, I would focus more on working towards balanced phonation. So if you're not making smooth transitions into the zona di passaggio, then there's not quite the right amount of subglottic air pressure that's occurring as you ascend. The difference between thyroarytenoid dominant singing and the amount of airflow required versus what you would need getting into the zona di passaggio, it increases as we ascend, but the differences are much, much less than the actual creation of subglottic air pressure. And so focusing on maintaining good airflow, I think, would be a key thing to do. Singing with vibrato is great. That's generally a good indication of a released resonant system that's working with itself, but if it's at all choppy, or if it is, and by choppy I mean it favors, like, usually it favors the downside. So if you got a vibrato that's like where it's kind of bottom heavy on you, that's a good indication that something's not quite right here. We're relying too much on pitch manipulation as opposed to a nice oscillation occurring between subglottic air pressure and vocal fold engagement. That will get you a much rounder vibrato. Which I won't do if I talk this much. That remains sung through. Singing in lower keys can be really, really good. That's particularly in congregational singing. We want to choose carefully our keys to make sure that we get them, assuming that most of our congregations are going to be untrained vocalists. Think about where a general rule of thumb is try to keep the males out of the zona di passaggio, more or less. What that's going to do is that's going to mean that most males will sing down an octave from you, and almost all of the female congregants will sing along in unison with you. And that can work really, really well. Sometimes it does prove challenging in terms of the vocalist's tessitura. Should I now simply rely on microphones to amplify my voice? Well, yes, the microphone is going to be amplifying the voice, but that doesn't absolve us from good vocal technique. Having good dynamic contrast in our singing lines gets transmitted. Dynamic contrast is also very good for us as vocalists, making sure that if we're starting in a thyroarytenoid dominant singing voice and ascending towards the zona di passaggio, that we increase subglottic air pressure. That will result in a slight crescendo in the vocal line. That's good for the music, that's good for our voices, and good for our overall musicianship. Microphones don't absolve us from what we do. In fact, I would make the argument that having a microphone in one's face like that can impede our overall vocal technique, especially if we get into the habit of singing to the mic. So if it's right there and you're really focused on being right to the mic, that will frequently lead towards releasing too much engagement in the torso, really not singing fully and perpetuating habits that are really not advantageous for our overall vocal tone production. Now, I think getting back to the last thing here, singing louder when others singing along. This is an interesting point, because there are any number of things that are removed from the equation when we sing along or we're singing with another person or with a track. One, we are no longer responsible for rhythmical integrity. We can guide off of the track. We're not responsible for knowing the melody in advance, so we can follow along. Even if we know the tune reasonably well, singing along with the track can make it a lot easier instead of having to know the rhythm very well so that you know that you'll be coming in at the appropriate times. Counting in the rests especially. If we're not counting in the rests, we're kind of feeling our way through there. That leaves us susceptible to always wondering where our next entrance is going to be, and any amount of hesitation or any amount of uncertainty hurts us as vocalists. We want to be good musicians and, count the rests, know where we're going to come in and do so. We have to be prepared in advance to make those entrances effective. And finally, knowing the overall melody of the tune. If we're guiding along with someone, we can listen specifically to that. We don't necessarily have to try to listen to the track. And more to the point, if we really want to be in tune, we have to be thinking ahead of the song and thinking about where those notes are going to be so that we are anticipating the appropriate amount of subglottic air pressure and where the line is going. Now, in truth, that's what practice is for. Those things ideally would be worked out in our practice away from rehearsals and away from performance. I think all too frequently in popular genres, the notion of rehearsal is synonymous with practice, and I would suggest that they are not, in fact, the same thing. Practice is what we do on our own, where we are learning the lines, learning the lyrics, working through problem areas, figuring out what the key is going to be, figuring out if there are any problem spots with range or stuff like that, and fixing all of that there. Rehearsal is where it is all put together. So if I, as the vocalist, and the guitar player, and the bass player, and the drummer have all practiced well, when we then come together, we all know our parts already. And we practice making music. We practice putting it together in a musical way. It is true that from day to day things will change. In some days the key is not going to be right, and we rely on the musicianship and the flexibility of other musicians to be able to make those accommodations from time to time. Hopefully not too frequently, but from time to time on the day of the rehearsal, the keys can change and things like that. But in general, we want to work all that out before we get to rehearsal. Rehearsal, again, perhaps this is just an ideal, but it can, in fact, be like this. Rehearsals are where things are put together. Practice is where we work out the kinks. I think I've covered everything. There's a lot of questions. Thank you so much. Again, really appreciate it. Take really good care of your voices. Enjoy singing. Hopefully we'll see you again. Bye. Together. Practice is where we work out the kinks. I think I've covered everything. There's a lot of questions. Thank you so much. Again, really appreciate it. Take really good care of your voices. Enjoy singing. Hopefully we'll see you again. Bye.